We're live now, Judy.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody, and the warmest possible welcome to our third North Herts Holocaust Memorial Day event, and welcome to you wherever you are in the world, because one of the things we've discovered through pandemic and over the last couple of years is that we're not constrained anymore to just speaking to people close to us. So on this third event, which is about one day, and we can interpret that in whatever ways we want to. That's one of the joys of a phrase like one day. We held our first Holocaust Memorial event for North Herts in 2020 in a small but absolutely lovely open air session in Letchworth. And then we enjoyed a thing called lunch together afterwards, which is something we haven't done very much of since. In 2021, we did the whole event on Zoom, and I was worried about that because I thought it might make it smaller and narrower and less personal. And in fact, we had people joining us from all around the world, and one of those people is with us from Israel today. In 2022, we'd hoped for a hybrid event so that we could still have our lunch together, but also welcome everybody who wanted to join us from around the world. But sadly, it wasn't to be because of the new strain of pandemic that made us feel a little bit unsafe. But over those 3 years, and the reason I keep going on about it, is that we've built a sort of North Herts Holocaust Memorial Day team. And one day we're able to meet together again and around the world. But our team has suffered great sadness this year by losing our poet in residence, John Gahori, who had been with us from the beginning and who died very suddenly in October. And we miss him terribly, but are really pleased that his daughter, Zoe Folbig, is able to join us today to read the poem that he had submitted to Alan Garber and to Trevor Avery the day after last year's Holocaust Memorial Day event. So he clearly expected it to be read, and it jolly well will be. But we also, since those early days, have had our very own rabbi in residence, and it's always good to have one of those, particularly on Holocaust Memorial Day. And so I'm going to stop wittering on, other than to say there will be lumps and bumps in our event this morning, because there always are lumps and bumps on Zoom events that are aiming to bring people together around the world. So please bear with us for those. But this isn't a lump and a bump. I'm now going to hand over to our rabbi in residence, Alan Garber, to take us to the next part of our service this morning.
Thank you very much, Judy, and for your warm welcome, and welcome to everybody who is watching around locally, around the world, as Judy mentioned. Today's theme for Holocaust Memorial Day is one day. So this one day that we have is to focus our attention on some of the darkest moments of our recent human history, from the Nazi Holocaust and then to genocides we have unfortunately witnessed since in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. This one day enables us to concentrate our focus on our individual and collective humanity and responsibility, to learn from history and to build for the future. This one day helps us to honor the memory of those who tragically lost their lives and to think about those lost generations and lost opportunities. The power of one day also helps us to recognize that often lives are overturned from one day to the next. Franziska Schwartz Mikus was sterilized by the Nazis because she was deaf, as it was part of the process of persecuting anyone who didn't fit into the Nazi ideal. In this case, because they believed that disabled people were imperfect and worthless. On that one day, the Nazis took Franziska's body and her life choices. But on one day, we can change these negative times to positive building, which is what Holocaust Memorial Day is all about. By joining together, we are making a very powerful and positive statement of our joint intent to make a better world. So today we have a rich range of speakers, which will give us the opportunity to come together in reflection, thought, and prayer and unity to build a positive present and a hopeful future. So we'll start off shortly with local faith leaders, and then we have Zoe Big, who is the daughter of John Kahori, who's going to be reading out John's poem, as Judy mentioned. We also have back this year a Yankee Fachler, who was raised in Letchworth Garden City. And as Judy mentioned, a special connection was made to Israel. And he will be introducing Carol Aney, who is also a resident, grew up in Letchworth Garden City. And then also we have this morning Trevor Avery, a good friend of myself and my family, who runs the Holocaust program up in the Lake District, and he'll be telling us a little bit about the amazing project that he's been building up there, and the now famous story of the Windermere children, the young children who came across survivors of the Holocaust. I'd like to start the proceedings with sharing you a short prayer, which was written by jointly the Chief Rabbi, Rabbi Ephraim Mervis, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and Senior Imam, Kari Asim. And the prayer goes as follows. Loving God, we come to you with heavy hearts, remembering the 6 million Jewish souls murdered during the Holocaust. In the horrors of that history, when so many groups were targeted because of their identity, and in genocides which followed, which have included Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur, we recognize destructive prejudices that drive people apart. Forgive us when we give space to fear, negativity, and hatred of others simply because they are different from us. In the light of God, we see everyone as equally precious manifestations of the divine and can know the courage to face the darkness. Through our prayers and actions, help us to stand together with those who are suffering so that light may banish all darkness, love will prevail over hate, and good will triumph over evil. Amen. Enjoyed this morning's program.
Thank you so much, Alan. And now we're going to hear some reflections on what the theme One Day means to people of other faiths from around North Herts. And I'd like to start by introducing Reverend Graham Clayton Knight from Baldock Methodist Church. Over to you, Graham.
Thank you, Judy. My one day that I remembered was one in August 2007. I don't remember the exact date. But after much waiting, we were there on the coach on our way to visit Auschwitz. It had been a long-term ambition, particularly for our history-mad son. And he'd chosen Auschwitz as our destination for our first holiday abroad as a family. Our daughter wasn't impressed at first, but it changed her as it changed me. And we were on the coach, and it was long and it was straight, the road was, and the tall trees either side were obscuring any scenery to see, so there wasn't much to look at. The coach was quiet, and in my eye line I could see a young couple. They had big white shoes. They were up on the seats in front, and I was thinking, they're not paying proper attention. Feet on the seats. And I seemed lost in my judgment of them. In retrospect, maybe they were distracted by what they were about to face. Along the coach aisle, the other passengers were generally quiet. And then at last, long last, we arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau. And there in front of us was the famous gatehouse and the railway track behind. And I said, I don't know where we're supposed to go. And someone said, yes, imagine what it was like for those who arrived here when it was in use. I suppose it was about then that I realised that Auschwitz was unlike any other holiday destination. Somehow it had been something in books and in newsreels, but suddenly here were the actual buildings. There were huts and the sites of the huts where the material had been stolen or used as fuel. there was that grim railway station, the end of the line, the terminus, reminding me of the finality for those who arrived. And there was grass, kept trim and neat. And as we were guided around, very little was said, only some muted exchanges between couples or families. Some of our fellow travellers bending down, picking up perhaps a piece of clover or a small bloom. Soon enough, we were back on the coach and travelling to Auschwitz I, to the museum exhibits, to the suitcases, the shoes, the human hair, the cans of gas. The thing that affected me most of all was a grey pool or pond, the final resting place for many, and I can still visualise it and remember how solemn it was to stand there and how quiet everyone was. So the journey back on the coach was different to the journey there. There was no longer looking for scenery, nor worrying about how someone else was sitting. I'd seen small groups or couples looking, talking quietly, bending down, touching, putting flowers down. It had shown me how important Auschwitz was and how important it had been for me to visit the place. And before that day, I'd not really thought about how people are forever linked because of Auschwitz. I'd not realised the effects that had resonated across the decades, across Europe and around the world. It was one day that changed my understanding and affected how I feel about humanity. It's one thing to read a book or watch the documentary, but when you see real individuals, those other people on my coach, connected by those historic events, then you realise that you also are connected. For we're all connected by what we do and how we treat one another. In these days, we find ourselves reminded of how we affect each other through our personal responses to pandemic, to refugees, to climate, in race and oppressive regimes. And it can be comforting to isolate oneself from the troubles of this world, not having to worry, being carefree. But isolation is a fallacy. Our responsibility to each other demands that we understand our inevitable interrelationships. If I have a hope for a future one day, it will be the one where each person can see the value of every other person, of every life, and see how we all affect each other. Historical sites like Auschwitz and the people that keep them going are a blessing to the world, for they enable us to see a way forward to a world without genocide, to a world that understands how very connected we all are.
Thank you so much, Graham. Thank you so much. That's remarkable and reminds me too of the night that my husband, David, incredibly unusually, had terrible nightmares after visiting Auschwitz. He had never had nightmares any other occasion I can recall, and that stayed with me forever as well. I'm going to now hand over to Chris Kell from the North Herts Interfaith Forum. Chris, as ever, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Judy. And I'm here speaking on behalf of my friend and fellow Quaker, Jenny Back, who unfortunately this morning has lost her voice. So it's my voice instead, but her words. One day in February 1991, my 3-year-old son, Chris, started having epileptic seizures. The onset of his illness was rapid and terrifying. One day he was a bright, articulate, sociable small boy, and the next he was lying in a hospital cot, having multiple seizures and unable to speak, eat, or move. He did recover quite a bit and is now able to walk, talk, and enjoy life in his own way. but he's 34 going on 4 in terms of what he's able to do. He requires full-time, one-to-one support to participate in society. He has a diagnosis of a kind of uncontrolled epilepsy called Lennox-Gastaut syndrome and severe learning difficulties. He's still affectionate, kind, loves children's picture books and jigsaws, as well as going to a pub or cafe for a meal and walking in the countryside. If Chris had lived in Germany at the time of the Holocaust, he would have been persecuted and probably killed, as many other people like him were. It's estimated that close to 250,000 disabled people were murdered under the Nazi regime. Even now, Chris is discriminated against and struggles to get by in a society that doesn't give him enough time to express himself. He's well looked after in a residential placement, but it's hard for him. He's loved by his family and all his carers. He always says please and thank you and is affectionate to people around him. Chris often says grace at mealtimes and then looks around the table to check that everyone has joined in with saying Amen. I'd like to share a passage from Quaker and Vices and Queries. Are you alert to practices here and throughout the world which discriminate against people on the basis of who or what they are or because of their beliefs? Bear witness to the humanity of all people, including those who break society's conventions or laws. Try to discern new growing points in social and economic life. Seek to understand the causes of injustice, social unrest, and fear. Are you working to bring about a just and compassionate society which allows everyone to develop their capacities and fosters the desire to serve? One day, we will find a cure for epilepsy and other neurological conditions. One day, we will find time to understand people who are different from us, rather than judge them. One day, we will learn to love and include everyone in our world, in all their variety and richness. Chris would say Amen to that.
Thank you so much, Chris Kell, for reading those words, but of course, even more to Jenny for writing them and being willing to share with us. And I'm delighted that Jenny is with us this morning, even though without voice, which she handed beautifully over to Chris. So thank you for that inspiring bit of teamwork. Thank you so much. I'm now going to ask Usman Shahzad Butt, who's the Imam of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Association of Stevenage, to share some thoughts with us, and you are so very welcome.
Respected organizers, fellow guest speakers, and viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. The 27th of January is Holocaust Memorial Day, and it serves as a somber reminder of the terrible atrocities committed by the Nazis in the Second World War. It is hoped that by reflecting on this dark chapter of human history, humanity will always strive to prevent such horrors from happening again. In fact, this is one of the specific objectives of the commemoration, which seeks to ensure that the horrendous crimes, racism, and victimization committed during the Holocaust are never forgotten nor repeated, whether in Europe or elsewhere in the world. Today, I was asked to share my thoughts on the theme of one day that serves as a potent reminder of the importance of fighting against all forms of persecution and oppression. As a member of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, I am well aware of religious persecution and discrimination and sympathize with all such victims. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community is among the most persecuted Muslim communities in the world. This is at the hands of religious extremists, state and quasi-state institutions. Ahmadi Muslims self-identify and profess to be Muslims, but our belief is irrelevant under the law in Pakistan. That is because Pakistan is the only Islamic state in the world to define explicitly who is or is not a Muslim in its constitution. The Second Amendment to Pakistan's constitution, passed on September the 17th, 1974, declared Ahmadi Muslims to be non-Muslims. This day holds great significance in our community's history, as it has further fueled the grave injustices and religious persecution, which is just not limited to Pakistan, but has spread to other countries around the world, including India, Bangladesh, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Libya, and Syria. For me personally, this one day holds great significance in our struggle and effort to eliminate all kinds of injustices, oppression, and transgression against humanity. I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts, and would like to end by presenting a verse of the Holy Quran, which serves as a golden principle to eliminate all kinds of injustices, oppression, and discrimination. God Almighty states in chapter 16, verse 91, "Verily Allah enjoins justice and the doing of good to others, and giving like kindred, and forbids indecency, and manifests evil and wrongful transgression. He admonished you that you may take heed." In this verse, we have been commanded to adopt 3 values and to abstain from 3 evils. If we ponder over them, we will find that these are the qualities that lead to love and affection and prevent chaos and disorder in society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing those words with us, and even more for being with us today. It's lovely to see you, and I hope that you will join us in years to come as well. And finally, in this section, it's my very great pleasure to introduce from my part of Hitchin, actually, Father Tom O'Brien from Our Lady Immaculate and St Andrew's Church in Hitchin. So over to you, Tom.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be with you to share this particular Memorial Day. Pastor Martin Niemöller wrote the following. First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, but I did not speak out because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. In 1959, Dinah Washington sang, "What a difference a day makes." We can make a difference each day we promote peace, harmony, and mutual love between us and those around us, and speak up for justice. So let's be reminded of certain days in history that brought about major changes for good. The 3rd of March in 1947, just after the First World War, Japan renounced war and the threat of force as a means of settling international disputes. In May 1948, the United Nations peacekeeping force was established. In December 1948, the United Nations published the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In 1961, we saw the foundation of Amnesty International, dedicated to protecting the rights of people around the world. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. In January 1969, we saw the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, prohibiting arbitrary and unreasonable racial discrimination. In 1981, we saw the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Also in that year, the United Nations established the International Day of Peace to be celebrated on the 21st of September each year. In December 1984, the Torture Convention outlawed torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, backed up by the United Nations. And we remember too, in 1989, the peaceful reunification of East and West Germany at the fall of the Berlin Wall. We've heard about Auschwitz, and in 2020, the Council of Christians and Jews encouraged the use of this prayer for Holocaust Memorial Day. This was the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. God of the past, present, and future, we remember today the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust, the millions of other victims of Nazi persecution, and all those who have been targeted and killed in subsequent genocides. We remember those who, having survived genocide, share their stories with us. We give you thanks for the lessons of human stories, both in their suffering and in their joy. We remember those who stood up against injustice and saved lives. We give thanks to you for their example. Together, we acknowledge the sacrifice of those that stand together with those who suffered during the Holocaust and other genocides. We affirm that every life is loved by you and sacred. Yet, during the Holocaust, too many failed to stand together with their neighbors. Oppression stains your world and contradicts your love. So we pray that you will inspire us now as we stand together on this day in the love that we know of God in Christ Jesus. Let us commit to remembering and glorifying God in our words and in our actions. Amen. And just to remind you that this evening between 7 and 8 o'clock, we're asked to light a candle, join the whole nation in remembering together those who were murdered or who have for who they were, and commit to standing against all forms of prejudice and hatred.
Thank you so much, Tom, for those heartfelt and important words to us all, and a reminder of tonight's activity as well. We're now going to, excuse me, we're now going to see a short film from the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust about the genocide in Bosnia. And when we've seen the video, we're going to just pause, I think, for a minute's silence before we start talking and listening and hearing each other again. So over to whoever's going to put on the video. Thank you.
You know, we were attacked because we were Muslims, because it was a Serb plan to claim this part of the country for themselves. So in that sense, what happened here was not personal. People who targeted me from the above. On the other hand, it was so personal when it came to the people who attacked us. because I recognized many soldiers. And then of course neighbors came from behind the hedge.
Thank you very much, everybody. Whilst we were contemplating quietly then, we saw the winning entries of the children's art competition for this year's North Arts Holocaust Memorial Day. And I will risk the stereotype, the gender stereotype of young children by pointing out how little girls of the same age as little boys, generally speaking, put a huge amount of effort into neatness of their drawings, whereas little boys put a huge amount into the message of their drawing. And I know this is stereotypical and it's very naughty of me and I'll probably be slated for it afterwards, but I was massively struck by this when I was first shown those two pictures. But now I'm going to invite Zoe Volbig, who I introduced you to earlier this evening, the daughter of our poet in residence, John Gowari, who very sadly died very suddenly in October, to present and read our written competition winning entry. So over to you, Zoe.
Hello, thank you for having me on Holocaust Memorial Day. And thank you to Charlie Tooley, 15-year-old competition winner, for his beautiful writing about an account from a prisoner at Bergen-Belsen labor camp. Charlie's won this for his evocative and moving, chilling piece that I'm about to read out. So congratulations, Charlie. And I'm sure you have an exciting future ahead of you with your writing. So keep it up. Long may it continue. Okay, this piece is called Eine seltsame Seite, A Strange Sight, by Charlie Tooley, age 15, set in Bergen-Belsen labor camp, Hanover province, Germany, 14th of April, 1945. This morning, the day is the same, but the only difference is more beds are left empty, and the process is yet to repeat again until we are all gone. All across the camp lay rows upon rows of men, women, children, crippled, and anyone who wasn't slowing their fanatical machine down. It wasn't just us Jews who were being stamped out of existence. There were Poles, Gypsies, Dutch, and Soviets. One Soviet who was in the camp was from a city called Stalingrad in Russia. He says he was captured with a few of his comrades, but they were cut down by the Germans, and he was the only one left. He died 3 weeks ago after trying to steal food from the commandant's quarters. He was tied against a post and shot and dumped in a ditch next to our hut. Since then, the pile has got so high it almost blocks the sunlight. In the distance, you can hear the carnage of the Goliath, which is war. Every sunrise, the road will be mobbed with civilians from the local towns, running away from the incoming hell that they foresee. They just stare at us in disgust, as if it is our fault. The SS guards with their Prussian skull badges on their caps are a bunch of ruthless dogs, not even dogs, but almost demons. When an order is given, they do it, and for them, killing us is a sport and a pleasure. Such as Irma Grieser. She murders without thought or remorse and goes around the camp with a stare like an eagle looking for vermin. The commandant, Hauptsturmführer Joseph Kramer, was no different and is notorious for his cruelty towards prisoners and his hatred towards Jews. He is a ruthless and loyal fascist. He goes around the camp with a chest full of medals and honours, with a scar on the left side of his face. Wherever he walks, terror always follows. He stood in the square of the camp with guards bearing their rifles and wearing their distinctive uniforms with a noticeable SS badge on their right collar, and ordered, "Lieutenant, have your men form a working party of 50 men and march them to the woods to work on those new huts. If any of them try anything, shoot them." His lieutenant, of course, salutes, and his men go around the huts and pull anyone out like a dog hunting moles. We watched them go down the road, but they never came back. Only the officer and his men returned, but we know what happened to them. May God rest upon their souls. 15th of April, 1945. We woke up this morning to find the camp totally deserted. We're all questioning, where are the guards? We found page after page of documents and photographs burnt to ashes. They tried everything to erase any existence of this God-forsaken place. A few hours later, we heard the sound of vehicles and talking, and we saw men, not in grey uniforms, but talking English and staring in awe at what they've just seen. We stared back at them in pure confusion. I didn't know if I was dreaming or if I was actually seeing British soldiers. One soldier went up to the gates and yelled to someone to get the colonel and tell them what they've just found. They removed the locks and entered the camp. Some of us walked up to them asking for food, clothes, or crying in pain. One man hugged a soldier and cried, my God, thank you, help us, please." The soldiers discovered what the guards were trying to hide. They found the mass graves, ovens, and piles of burnt bodies. A few soldiers cried, and few were sick due to the horrific stench. Later that day, a group of soldiers had found some of the German guardsmen hiding, some of them even pretending to be one of us. Somewhere amongst those men, somewhere, is Joseph Kramer. When we walked past them, we shouted, "German dogs!" We also spat on them in disgrace, and suddenly being escorted by armed British soldiers, we see the beast of Bergen-Belsen himself, but not a chest full of medals, but in a tattered and ragged uniform. It was a sight to remember. And when we heard that Irma Grieser had also been captured, we finally felt that it was all over for us and that all the pain and suffering has finally gone away. After 4 years in captivity and what is left of the prisoners of Bergen-Belsen are finally free. Both Irma Grieser and Joseph Kramer were convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity and were both executed by hanging on the 13th of December, 1945 in Hamelin prison. Charlie ends it with this: in memory of all the Holocaust survivors and the ones who sadly died due to the hands of the Nazis in the concentration camps, and to the British and Canadian soldiers of the British 11th Armoured Division who liberated these people from the terrors of Bergen-Belsen, and to one of my relatives whose tank was the first to enter Bergen-Belsen during the liberation. Congratulations, Charlie, that was beautiful.
Thank you so much, Zoe, for reading it. And thank you so much, Charlie, for a marvellous piece of writing. It says on my script that you're going to present the winner, but there's not an actual presentation, is there, Zoe?
No, but I believe Charlie and his family are watching right now. So it's a virtual handing over and presentation. So well done, Charlie.
Thank you so much. Well done, Charlie. And thank you so much, Zoe. We're going to be hearing from Zoe again later, but now I'm going to introduce Yankee Fashler, who I didn't know much about until this time last year, when he joined us for the first time for our Holocaust Memorial Day celebration, and absolutely amazed loads of us who didn't know, who actually have lived in North Herts almost forever, but didn't know about the Jewish community post-war in Letchworth Garden City. And my goodness me, we learned a huge amount. Yankee is the founder and president and boss and chief executive and everything else that there is to be of the Jewish Historical Society of Ireland. And once again, we're delighted that remote connection and Zoom enables us to be together with him to share some more personal story. So over to you, Yankee, and you're so very welcome. You're muted, Yankee.
Yeah, thank you very much. Before I start, I just want to say how moved I've been by the presentations so far this morning. Rabbi Garber, representatives of faith communities, counselors, ladies and gentlemen. I am a second-generation Holocaust survivor. Both my parents escaped from Nazi Germany as teenagers before World War II. They met during the war. My father, Eli, was a British soldier, and my mother, Eva, was a land girl. And they settled in Letchworth, and it is in Letchworth where I and my 6 siblings were born and raised. And I've just finished writing a history of the Jews of Letchworth. Dozens of Letchworth residents were Holocaust survivors who together lost thousands of family members murdered by the Nazis and their willing collaborators in the Holocaust. Today's theme is one day. And for me, that one day is the 9th of November, 1938. Although my late father was born in Berlin, his parents were Polish Jews. And as we speak, my father's sister, a sprightly 94-year-old, is addressing a Holocaust Memorial Day event in Jerusalem. Even before the Germans invaded Poland and sparked World War II, Poland was already vying with Germany over which country was more anti-Semitic. In 1938, the Nazis decided that the Jews should be forcibly excluded from German society. And worried that a flood of Polish Jews who were living in Germany would return to Poland, the Polish government announced that Polish Jews who had not lived in Poland for the previous 5 years were to be deprived of their Polish citizenship. In other words, Polish Jews in Germany, like my father's family, could not return to Poland. They would have to remain in Germany. Well, Nazi Germany was having none of this. And one day, before the Polish law came into effect on the night of October the 27th, 1938, I know the date because it was my father's 15th birthday, Nazi Germany instituted the Polian Aktion, the Polish action. Thousands of Polish Jews were rounded up and taken to the Polish border and simply dumped there. But the Nazis had not reckoned on the response of the Poles, who had no intention of allowing their own citizens back into the country. There was a standoff. The Poles wouldn't let the Jews in, and the Nazis wouldn't let the Jews back. Some Jews managed to escape, but some 8,000 Polish Jews were now left in no man's land on the Polish-German border in a railway hamlet called Zbonjin. And one of those 8,000 was my grandfather. If the Polian Aktion had happened a couple of days later, my father would also have been on the list as a 15-year-old. For 6 months, my grandfather languished through the winter in this God-forsaken hamlet, surviving on food from Jewish welfare organizations. Another Jewish family at Zbonjin was the Greenspans, father, mother, and daughter. And the daughter wrote to her student brother Herschel in Paris, telling him of what had happened and asking him to do something to help his family. Herschel bought a revolver, walked into the German embassy in Paris, and shot the third secretary, who died soon after of his wounds. The Nazi government had been planning a large-scale attack on the Jewish community for some time. Herschel Greenspan gave them the perfect excuse. And on the night of the 9th of November, they initiated a pogrom that we know as Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. Hundreds of Jews were murdered, 30,000 Jews were arrested and taken to concentration camps, hundreds of synagogues were torched and destroyed, thousands of Jewish schools, Jewish shops, and other Jewish institutions were destroyed. Fast forward to November 2013. It is the 75th anniversary of Kristallnacht, and the rebuilt Brunnenstraße synagogue in Berlin that had been destroyed on Kristallnacht was being rededicated. In the presence of the German Minister of the Interior, the Chief Rabbi of Israel, and several hundred other guests. And the guest speaker was the only living survivor from the synagogue who had witnessed what happened that night. That sole survivor was my 90-year-old father, who had traveled to Berlin from Jerusalem. And here, in his own words, was what he told the spellbound audience. We knew that the assassination in Paris spelled trouble, but we could not guess how vicious the Nazi response would be. And during the late evening of November the 9th, we heard a commotion outside. Truckloads of SA brown shirts were breaking up our synagogue inside the building. Unlike the night the police arrested my father 2 weeks earlier, this time I was fully awake and standing with my mother by the window behind the curtains. At this point in his talk, my father pointed to an upper window in the synagogue. He continued, I could almost touch that window from my bedroom window. And suddenly we heard a loud, drunken voice yelling from downstairs, are there still any Jews alive up there? I can tell you that this was the first time in my life that I was really scared. I was shaking with frustration. Luckily, no one came upstairs. Next morning, we learned the full extent of the horrors of that terrible night. Thousands of German and stateless Jews, including some of my teachers, were rounded up and sent to concentration camps. And that morning, November the 10th, Goebbels made a radio announcement describing Kristallnacht as a spontaneous uprising of the German people against organized Jewry who had declared war against Germany. And I can still hear Goebbels cynically announcing that the Jewish community would pay a massive fine for the damage. I was one of the lucky ones because my mother managed to secure a place for me on the Kindertransport. My father was released shortly before I left for Britain. In May 1939, I arrived at my farm school on the Scottish estate of Lord Balfour. When I waved goodbye to my parents as the train left Berlin station, I could not have imagined that I would never see them again. The Nazis murdered my parents, my uncles, aunts, cousins, and other family members. And here I stand today, back in the same synagogue where I celebrated my bar mitzvah, the same synagogue where my father helped to lead the services, the same synagogue which I watched being smashed up 75 years ago. Within 18 months of this incredibly powerful speech, my father died. And at his memorial service in Jerusalem, my son was chosen by his 25 first cousins to deliver the eulogy. He spoke about my father's trauma on that one day, on Kristallnacht. And my son ended his words with the following. I look around me at so many of my grandfather's children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and there's one thing I can assure that Nazi thug. Yes, there are still Jews alive up there. I now invite my fellow Letchworth Jew, Carol Aney Roth.
Thank you to the North Herts Council for today's event. My late mother, Marion, loved everything about living in Letchworth. One day, on the 6th of February, 1939, Marion left Germany for England on the Kindertransport. She began writing poetry and prose from the age of 8, and soon after arriving in England, started writing in English. Her love and understanding of the English language are evident from the outset. Upon moving to Letchworth in 1954, my parents were welcomed with open arms by the Jewish community, as well as the wider Letchworth community. My mother met and befriended other people in the Jewish community who were from a similar background and circumstances to her own, which no doubt helped her find her place and to some extent, peace of mind. In conversations I had with her, I understood the pain and the scars of what happened to her parents never left her and were a constant in her mind. The pieces I have chosen today reflect Marion's thoughts and how hard it was for her to come to terms with what was happening. On behalf of my brother and myself, I want to thank Yankee for reading the poems. He knew my mother from childhood, and they had the greatest respect for each other. So I can think of no one more suited for this purpose. Thank you.
The first poem was written by Marion on May the 5th, 1940, 15 months after she arrived in England. For Mummy's birthday. I feel very much alone. I would love to be with you. Nonetheless, I hope this day will bring you much pleasure. I've picked a few flowers to decorate your photo. There is so much I would love to tell you, but all I am allowed to do is write poetry. I pray in the morning and at night and all day so that God may look after you. I'm not only praying for you, but also for Daddy. I do hope the future will bring you more luck than in the past as the years go by. I do hope that hope, pleasure, and good luck may soon be with you. And I hope that these sentiments will be with you at all times, and that we will soon be united. That, to me, will be everlasting spring, my special, lovely mummy. And the second poem was written by Marion to her father on the 24th of August, 1942. Daddy, to you my thoughts should wander, to you alone today, but I find I cannot ponder. I don't know what to say. There is something that arrests me. My brain has gone all numb, and in my throat quite plainly I felt a choking lump. I cannot think, I cannot figure, I just can't make it out. Oh, gone is all my vigor. It's you I cannot think about. I want to think of you and picture where you are, but I'll be blowed. I do not dare to send my thoughts so far. Don't think that I don't love you. The longer time wears on, the more I'm longing for you, the more I know it's all wrong. Yet I am still your daughter. My confidence is there. Let's drink to optimism and show them what we can bear.
Thank you so much, Yankee and Carol, and of course, Marion, for writing those gorgeous, gorgeous words. Well, I'll be blowed is not a phrase you hear very often anymore, is it? That's a marvelous one that just sort of hit me in the face. Well, I'll be blowed. A phrase I remember well from my childhood, but people don't say that often anymore. That's just utterly delightful. And we would not have had that interaction and those poems had we not been on Zoom a year ago, because Carol wouldn't have joined us and we wouldn't have met her. And this is just utterly lovely. So thank you very much indeed for that. And something else of which I was completely ignorant until I started listening to Alan and John Gohori a year ago talking about it, was the Lake District Holocaust project, of which I knew little, but has sparked the imagination of both Alan and John in different ways, I know. And so it's an absolute joy to welcome Trevor Avery, who is the director of the Lake District Holocaust Project, to share something of that with us. So you're so welcome, and thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure. I'm slightly reeling under the emotional impact of some of these talks. I do get very engaged with this, so my apologies if yeah, I get emotional. I think we're allowed to on a day like this. We actually began the Lake District Holocaust Project in 2005. Like, as you suggested, I hadn't heard about it until a local chap said to me, of course, you know, pointing at a wartime housing scheme, this is where the children from Auschwitz came. And of course, I didn't know. But my first conversation with a chap called Sir Ben Helfgott, I'm sure many of you have heard of. Ben he's a very, very dear friend, and he came to Windermere as one of the Windermere children. And I said to Ben, I want to talk to you about Windermere and your time here. And he said, oh, Windermere. So I thought, well, that's an interesting aspect, Windermere. And I said, well, what I'd like to do is put a memorial to you guys in the Lake District. And this next response from him has guided us ever since, because he said, Trevor, no memorials to us in the Lake District. We didn't die there. We came alive again. So we've had a slightly different approach to give a license to have a different approach from most of the sort of Holocaust commemoration centre. We celebrate the survival of these children. But I'm also very aware, very recently, we were requested and we had a visit from the Duchess of Cambridge. She wanted to come and learn more about the Windermere children. She'd seen the film and everything. And she was talking to, we had one or two survivors and their families. I arranged for them to come. And one of those was Ike Alterman. Ike lives in Manchester. And he was describing to the Duchess of what it was like in the Lake District. But something leapt out at me. And she said to him, so was this a very, very happy time? And he said, oh my goodness, it was a very, very happy time. He said, the hills, the mountains, the food. But then he said something really interesting that I hadn't heard him say before. He said, but all the time I was here, I missed my mother and father. And when I moved to Manchester, I was alone. And I had to build up a business, and I had to find my own way of life. And I still missed my mother and father. And he said, I've missed my mother and father all my life. He's now into his 90s. And he said, it's a little bit like having a tumor in your stomach that you cannot cut out. Now, although we celebrate, we do celebrate their lives and their survival, we also, we generally do that on August the 14th when they arrive. But we also know when you talk to them, certainly as they grew older, I've talked to very many of them, they had a fear. They had a fear that what they went through and how they lost their families would be forgotten. The concern was deniers were around, denying it had happened, but mainly it was a fear of being forgotten, that the world must learn its lesson. And I think that's the importance of Holocaust Memorial Day, that we focus on all those lost and learn those lessons. I had a dear friend, Maya Hirsch, again in Manchester, and Maya, very, very sadly, Maya and his wife Judith, Maya was a survivor of Auschwitz-Birkenau for 18 months, and he learned to be a tailor. He wasn't a tailor, but he learned very quickly to be a tailor because he told the Nazi guards that's what he was. And he learned to be a tailor under the threat of death. And you see some of his work in the museum in Manchester, his clothes work. But Maya and Judith, bless them, they were, for whatever reason, unable to have children. And it bothered Maya because he was he spoke to hundreds of thousands of children around Manchester before he passed away about 5 years ago. But he made me promise, and I made the promise, I would always tell Maya's story and what happened to his family. Now, I can't do it here, but we have it in the exhibition, we have it in the archives. And Maya represents it. He was from Herts, and his family were all murdered in Kumhof in the gas vans. So I always make a point of mentioning him. When it comes to one day, there are two one days I think of. One day, the first one is what Arik Hirsch once said to me, and a few others have said it as well. In the camps, you took it one day at a time. You couldn't think of the future. You couldn't think of hope. It was too oppressive. The danger was all around you. You lived in the moment, but you just needed that, whatever it was, you needed that will to live, but you couldn't think of the future. Until one day, they arrived in Windermere on August the 14th. And Windermere, as they will say, we began to be able to dream again. We did begin to have hope again for the future. So yes, we always celebrate August the 14th when they came alive again, when they were born again. But I always make a point of mentioning Maya and thinking about the significance of Holocaust Memorial Day. Not least that when we give talks, people love to hear this story, resilience, children surviving, coming to Windermere. But we make a point that these were, and they will all say it themselves, these were the very, very fortunate few children who survived. The estimate is, it's an unknown, probably 1.5 million children were murdered. Jewish children were murdered in the Holocaust. And the children that came here were the very, very fortunate few. So we need to remember all those children that didn't come and all those families of the boys on this particular day. We need to remember, and we all really do need to learn the lessons of the Holocaust. And thank you for inviting me to say a very few words. It is an emotional day, but yeah, thank you.
And thank you, Trevor, for coming and sharing those thoughts with us. And I now have an appetite for learning a great deal more about the project that you head up in the Lake District. That's absolutely marvellous. I'm going to hand back in a second to Zoe Folbig to read the related poem that was written by John Gahori for this event. But I said earlier there would be lumps and bumps, and one of my omissions on lump and bump is that I did actually forget to say earlier that Zoe Folbig was not only John Gahori's daughter, but a writer and novelist in her own right. So she's not just here with no interest in literature of her own. And I'm very grateful to her that she's agreed to read this poem. So over to you, Zoe.
Thank you. So last Holocaust Memorial Day, I was in the throes of homeschooling my two young boys because we were in lockdown. And when we realised that John Gahori, their grandfather, would be reading his poem Beast in the Maze at the North Herts District Council online Zoom event, I thought, well, actually, this is a perfect lesson. Let's put aside fractions, which I'm terrible with anyway, and watch grandfather reading his poem. And of course, Holocaust Memorial Day brings so many lessons anyway. So we logged on and joined the event live, and it was very moving, and it was interesting, and it was powerful. And it was also funny to see grandfather on their big homeschool computer. What we didn't realize when we were watching was that that grandfather was so inspired by Rabbi Garber's talk at the start of the program. He was talking about Tu B'Shvat, which happened to fall on the following day last year. And Rabbi Garber was talking about why Jews celebrate the New Year of Trees in January, when which could seem odd because it's such a bleak and barren time in January to celebrate the trees. But the New Year of Trees is the shoots bringing hope for spring. So my dad, John Gahori, he went away and he wrote a poem the very next day for today's event. He had that in mind, which he sent to Rabbi Garber and dedicated it to the rabbi, and took great pride in it. And then also he had an exchange with Trevor because he was very interested in the Windermere children, and he had also watched the documentary. And Trevor kindly responded, talking about the Auschwitz acorn and the growth that had happened up there. So it all linked in beautifully, and my dad was due to read it today. Unfortunately, he passed away in October. Sorry. Which I suppose is that's my one day would be October, and the passing of my dad. So I'm here to read the poem that he couldn't, and I'm sorry, this is another lump and bump in the road. But the poem, it was so beautiful. It's about obviously Holocaust sufferers and remembrance and surviving, but also remembering that such atrocities do sadly go on. But remembering the hope that we find in nature, which I found beautiful, and the hope that we find in remembrance and remembering things. So obviously this is a powerful poem for Holocaust Memorial Day, and trying not to make it just about me, but on a personal note, it's powerful for me to remember my dad through his verses. So I'm going to try to read it now. So at the New Year of Trees, it's called, for Rabbi Alan Garber. To plant trees is to look to the future, to nurture not only our grandchildren, but also the grandchildren of strangers. 3 years ago, friends planted 500 trees on their small farm: maple, beech, ash, horse chestnut, oak. Already the saplings have taken. A wood in the making, a green space in which nature and nurture conspire to bring about human happiness. Trees cool the planet, host lark and owl, linnet, rook, magpie. Insects abound. A wood sings, rustles, and breathes. It is habitat, coexistence, community. To remember is also to plant trees. On the day we plant trees, we acknowledge what some would forget, some let slip from their memory, others even deny. A goods train packed tight with children, the flames of the furnaces burning, survivors in rags, skeletal, traumatized. We gather and we remember. Our act of remembrance demands that we listen to those that were there, their descendants, that with them we look at photographs of themselves, of their families sent to the gas chambers, the black and white snaps showing what's meant by Vernichtung, and the reality that it was. It must never, we say, be repeated, yet it has been and is in Africa, Europe, and Asia, sanitized in the newspeak of ethnic cleansing. Time distances, language demeans. Folk, busy or bored, have things to get on with. We have to move on, we say, to move forward. We took trees for granted, found suddenly how much we need them, and began planting. It's the same with remembering. Every truth grows, spreads, forms over time a great wood in which all are equal, respected, sheltered in love. As a rabbi's words planted yesterday, already today are this verse, a small tree of a kind, written by John Gahori on the 28th of January, 2021. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zoe. And I know that was a really hard thing for you to do, partly because you're a writer, not a performer in everyday life. And I'm very, very grateful to you for doing that, which has made me a little bit incoherent. But we're coming now to the end of our event today. And in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Alan Garber, who's much better at that sort of stuff than I would ever be. But I'm just going to share one tiny little self-indulgent one-dayness for me as well, I suppose, which is sort of linked, which is that at the very, very end of October, I received a joyful email from the government of Germany granting me German citizenship, which I was absurdly excited about because it had taken so long to sort out. I have been entitled to German citizenship all my life because my father was one of the stateless Jews from Berlin who Hitler had made stateless, which means that I and many other family members are also entitled to dual nationality. And I'd never sort of, most of my life, felt that I needed it, but not wanting to be ever political on an occasion like this, I have to say that the referendum of 2016 that took us out of the EU suddenly made me very, very much want to become a German citizen and remain European. So a strange thing that Hitler is responsible also for my ability to have German citizenship, which is the most self-indulgent thing I will say today, I hope. And thank you all so much for taking part in our event today. And I'm handing straight over to Alan, who does these things better.
Judy, thank you so much for helping us through today's service. I'm going to be finishing off now with a few thank yous. and hopefully a little message to finish off as we finish our service together. So first of all, big thank you to Judy for helping us through the proceedings. You mentioned the theme throughout was lumps and bumps, and I think that's a nice theme to think about as we're finishing today, because the truth is, as we reflected before we came on air, life is often about lumps and bumps, and really what we need to do is be able to help each other through the good times and the more challenging times. And I think that's what we've done today through today's service. So thank you, Judy, for helping us. I'd also like to thank the North Herts Faith Forum organisation, the different speakers. That's Reverend Graham Clayton Knights, Chris Kell when she read out on behalf of Jenny Back, Usman Shahzad Butt, Reverend Tom Bryan, for their amazing reflections, and it's really strengthened us to think that we're coming together, different faiths, on this one day to share and to grow together. And also want to thank, on ABOY's behalf, Zoe Folbig for introducing the poem, which was written by Charlie, which was very, very powerful. And then later on reading her poem of the New Year for Trees on behalf of her dear late father. And we wish, on behalf of everybody, wish you a long life. And also to Yankee and to Carol, who really brought the message back home to us in terms of the local message of Letchworth Garden City. And it gives me a chance, as I did last year and the year before as well, to thank the Letchworth Garden City community for all the kindness that they did for the Jewish community all those many years, and that traditional tolerance, and it continues today. Also, on behalf of everybody, we joined this year for the first time Trevor Avery, who expands our knowledge of our understanding of the Holocaust. And Trevor and myself, my family, become very good friends over the past few years, and he's doing tremendous work. And if anybody's up in the Lake District, I really encourage you to go up there, visit Trevor, and visit the amazing exhibit that they've got there and the work which is continually expanding. Finally, I'd like to thank Alice Sims, who helped to put us all this whole program together, along with the other members of the council. And it is quite incredible to get people now all over the world who are joining on this wonderful on this day of contemplation. So let's just summarize now what we've hopefully achieved today. So today's theme has been one day. And although we have been reflecting on challenging and difficult aspects from our joint history, it should not lead us feeling sad. And that's really hoping that today we should not be feeling sad today. Rather, we should come together leaving with a positive strength that we have come together. Indeed, the 27th of January 1945 was the day of the liberation of Auschwitz. And similarly today, may we continue, this day should always be a day of thinking about liberation, about positively building for the future. In John's poem about the New Year for Trees, and as Zoe reflected as well, the idea of planting now for the future. And even when things are very dark, we have to look to those shoots of positivity. So what a powerful way it has been to honor the memories of those who perished in the Holocaust and genocides since. So the final message I'd like to leave you is a message of hope. At the end of each communal prayer in a synagogue, we finish with the following sentence. Every single prayer, morning, afternoon, and evening, we say, Bayom Hahu, on that day, on that one day, which will soon be in the future, Hashem Ihyeh Echad U'Shemo Echad, that God will bring us together, the whole of humanity together, in absolute unity, love, and respect. This one day, please God, we are moving in that direction. So as we leave and we say goodbye to each other today, let's go back to our families and to our communities, taking the messages and inspirations that we have shared today into our thoughts and to our words and into our actions to keep on building a better world of love, unity, and respect. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much, everybody. And that concludes our event this morning, and look forward to seeing you all again on the 27th of January 2023. Thank you.
Judy, thank you so much. It was very special, really, really special. Wow, a lot of emotion I'm feeling at the moment.